Hello everyone, my name is Osama Jundi from Altınbaş University Department of Economics. Our course's name is Labor Economics. It's chapter 3. Let's start our presentation. Affirmative action policy and production cost. We have two types of firms, color-blind firm and discriminatory firm. A firm is color-blind if race does not enter the hiring decision. Discrimination shifts the hiring decision away from the cost minimization tangency point on the isoquant. The discriminatory firm chooses the input mix at point P, ignoring the cost minimizing rule that the isoquant be tangent to the isocost. An affirmative action program can force the firm to move to point Q, resulting in more efficient production and lower costs. A color-blind firm is at point P, hiring relatively more whites because of the shape of the isoquants. An affirmative action program will increase the firm's cost if it must further increase its amount of black labor. Marshall's rules. Labor demand is more elastic when the elasticity of substitution is greater. The elasticity of demand for the firm's output is greater. Labor's share in the total cost of production is greater. The elasticity of supply of other factors of production such as capital is greater. Factors demand when there are several inputs. There are many different inputs, skilled and unskilled labor, old and young, old and new machines. Cross-elasticity of factor demand. The cross-elasticity of factor demand gives the percentage change in the demand for output I resulting from a 1% change in the wage of output I. It can be calculated by dividing the percentage change in X on the percentage change in W, when Xi is equal to the demand of inputs and Wy is the wage of input. If cross-elasticity is positive, the two inputs are said to be substitutes in production. The demand curve for a factor of production affected by the prices of other inputs. The labor demand curve for input I shifts when the prices of another input changes. In case A, if the price of a substitutable input rises, the demand curve for input I shifts up. If the price of a complement rises, the demand curve for input I shifts down. Labor market equilibrium. In a competitive labor market, equilibrium is attained at the point where supply equals demand. The market clearing wage is W star at which E star workers are employed. Application: the employment effects of minimum wages. The unemployment rate is higher the higher the minimum wage, and the more elastic are the labor supply and demand curves. The benefits of the minimum wage occur mostly to workers who are not at the bottom of the distribution of permanent income. The impact of the minimum wage on employment. A minimum wage set at W/ results in employer cutting employment from E star to E/. The higher wage also encourages ES minus E star workers to enter the market. Thus, under a minimum wage, ES minus E/ workers are unemployed. This figure shows the nominal minimum wage in the United States since 1938 till 2011. Impact of minimum wages on the covered and uncovered sectors. If the minimum wages applies only to jobs in the covered sector, the displaced worker might move to the uncovered sector, shifting the supply curve to the right and reducing the uncovered sector's wage. If it's easy to get a job, a minimum wage job, workers in uncovered sector might quit their jobs and wait the covered sector until a job opens up, shifting the supply curve in the uncovered sector to the left and raising the uncovered sector's wage. Asymmetric variable adjustment cost. The slope of hiring workers is much flatter than firing workers. Looking at the graph, we can conclude that firing 25 workers is equal to hiring 50 workers, which means firing workers is much more costly. Changing employment quickly is costly, and this cost increases at increasing rate. If government policies prevent firms from firing workers, the cost of trimming the workforce will rise even faster than the cost of expanding the firm. The reason why the cost of firing is higher than hiring workers because when the firm fire a worker, then they are losing his or her work experience, and the new hired workers are subjected to make mistakes can lead to increase the cost for the firm. Slow transition to a new labor equilibrium. Variable adjustment cost encourages the firm to adjust the employment level slowly. The escalation from 100 to 150 workers might occur more rapidly than the construction from 100 to 50 workers if a government policy tax firms that cut employment. In this figure, we can see the difference in the time series that a firm needs to fire 50 workers and to hire 50 workers. Estimating labor demand. One can identify the slope of the labor demand curve, which can be used to calculate the elasticity of labor demand. When the supply curve shifts, problem must make sure the labor demand curve is not also changing. Problems with estimating labor demand. Labor market is in equilibrium at point P, yielding wage W0 and employment E0. Suppose that the supply curve of women shifts to the right. The new equilibrium would be at point Q, yielding the wage to W1 and employment E1. But in real-world situation, both supply curve and demand curve are shifting at the same time. So when both curves shift, the new equilibrium would be at point like R, with a wage W2 and employment E2. In this graph, we can see the change in unemployment in the wartime. And in this graph, we can see the percentage change in the weekly wage in the wartime. That's all. Thank you for your listening.